much as it is understood, this particular directive to hold anyone in quarantine, mandatory quarantine, if they're found having flouted the curfew rule, is definitely to discourage people from, being careless. However, in the same move and extension by the government, this is perhaps exposing many. And family members are rightfully, of course, concerned about the welfare of their people. Those who perhaps are now under quarantine, mandatory quarantine for one reason or another. And here's a case in point, as the Cabinet Secretary for Health, Mutahi Kagwe, made clear that anyone caught outside past curfew will be taken into quarantine. Those who've fallen victim have accused the police of taking it as an opportunity to extort hapless members of the public. And of the 455 who've been placed in quarantine for being out past curfew, there are those who've faulted the Ministry of Health policy of testing them at the end of the 14-day mandatory isolation period. They accuse the government of taking risks with their lives by potentially mixing infected persons with the uninfected. NTV's Olive Burrows brings us those personal accounts.
This is how Coco, a singer-songwriter, says he was handled by police, claiming to be enforcing the 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew. Not surprising, perhaps, for those who found themselves in the back of a police Land Cruiser or municipal pickup truck. But in the time of COVID-19 and by a government preaching the gospel of social distancing, it raises serious concerns, especially taking into account Coco's insistence that it was not yet 7 p.m. He was eventually charged with resisting arrest. Like Coco, another performer, Eko Dydda, an award-winning gospel artist, also found himself uncomfortably close to his fellow citizens on being arrested for being outside past curfew on Saturday night. He claims that he left home under extenuating circumstances, as he was trying to get medication for his ailing wife when he experienced car trouble. Nonetheless, he found himself at the Kilimani police station, where he says there was no regard for social distancing at the detention center. He now finds himself in another detention facility for the next 14 days by way of quarantine. His wife Sylvia views his being held in quarantine as punishment for her having been discovered recording the police at the Kilimani police station when she went to secure Eko Dydda's release.
Ningetaka kujua yo curfew rule. Ukipatikana na umepatikana violate, you get arrested and then you pay bail.
Yes.
For 5,000. Na hiyo, that's it. Ama kuna pesa ingine tena?
Si kama gari yako ilitolewa, you pay the breakdown.
But the Health Cabinet Secretary, Mutahi Kagwe, said it would be the new normal moving forward. But Sylvia still holds that had she not insisted on a receipt on parting with her 5,000 shillings in cash bail, her husband would be home with her and the 2 children instead of at the Kenya Medical Training College. When we called Kilimani OCPD Lucas Ogara to establish if there are measures in place to ensure social distancing in the handling of suspects and to ask why his officers insisted on cash instead of an M-Pesa payment by Sylvia's account, he hung up the phone. Police spokesman Charles Owino, however, exhorted officers to use their common sense when enforcing the curfew, especially where sick persons are involved and are seeking out treatment, but he did acknowledge that some officers can be very, very unreasonable. He also encouraged those who claim to have been extorted by officers under the guise of enforcing the curfew to register their complaints with the Internal Affairs or Independent Policing Oversight Authority, stating that we must take every complaint seriously. Resigned to his fate in quarantine, Eko Dydda has asked that they at the very least be supplied with masks and that the government take into consideration the financial constraints that many face when demanding 28,000 shillings as the cost for accommodation. Olive Burrows, NTV.